trying something different today where I'm filming very early in the morning. So we'll see how it goes. I initially was going to wear this hat for this video because I got it as a pre-order bonus. I'm at a point in my life where I hate getting pre-order bonuses for stuff, unless it's like the Splatoon plush. Like, make it something really nice or don't do it at all. I don't know. I feel like I'm just outside of the era where I want to get like quote unquote free swag for buying a video game. That hat was a pre-order benefit for Final Fantasy VII Rebirth back in February. That game came out at the end of February this year. Hey, it came out on February 29th, which was very intentional. I played FF7 Rebirth back in March. Oh my gosh, let's do a little show and tell, because I got, is this the deluxe edition where it comes with the beautiful steelbook? I don't know. Oh, I don't know how well this is going to read. I really chose a clinical tone to the light because we're doing sort of an autopsy today. So we have, oh my gosh, you can probably see the sweat. Ew, nasty. On the front, if you can see, it's Zack carrying Cloud back to Midgar, and then on the back it has the Buster Sword, and then of course the nice big box. Yeah, this is the deluxe edition. I'm sure there's a collector's that comes with like a Sephiroth statue. I also have the special edition of the remake. That's crazy. Anyways, I played it back in March and I've really agonized over how to deliver my opinions on that game. I simultaneously have a lot and nothing to say. That video is still cooking. It's just not totally there yet, but it is the inspiration for today's concept. I make videos in part knowing that my audience contains people who have maybe picked up a controller a couple times to play Mario Kart, to folks who are all in on one game. They know everything about it and their greatest pleasure in life is dunking on me in the comments. But I try to at least make things accessible for people who might not know the deep lore or the release history of a franchise. And Final Fantasy VII is definitely a franchise where your experience is augmented by the knowledge of other things that have happened in the franchise. Today's goal is to contextualize FF7 Rebirth while still highlighting the fuckery of Tetsuya Nomura and Hironobu Sakaguchi, the main creatives behind the series. The compilation of Final Fantasy VII, capital T, capital C, is an umbrella term for the multimedia catalog of projects that take place within the FF7 universe. Final Fantasy in general, for people who don't know, is an anthology series, so each numbered iteration is separate. They're generally playable on their own. Some of those entries have sequels within that number. For example, there's a Final Fantasy X-2. There's a Final Fantasy XIII-2. Some of them also veer away with genre. Final Fantasy 11 and 14 are MMORPGs. I don't think FF11 exists anymore, right? That flopped, and now they're focusing on FF14, which is really popular. That is my understanding. I'm not a big MMO player at all, although I've been told by a lot of people that I would really like 14. Not to be corporate Aaron about it, but I simply do not have the bandwidth right now. Also, this is like one of the Uniqlo collab shirts. There's a very beautiful woman on the back. I don't know what game this is from. I just thought the picture was very pretty, but if you want to let me know, sound off. When it comes to FF7 specifically, I'm interested in discussing the scope and the success of these titles in tandem with each other, because I think Square Enix's flagship property is having somewhat of an identity crisis, pun intended for those who know, and this has been happening in my opinion since like 2009. FF7 has accrued a little bit of everything over the years, so naturally we'll just start at the beginning. The original Final Fantasy VII was released for the PS1 in 1997. You start out in the city of Midgar and play as Cloud Strife, a former first-class soldier, which is a prolific military position, as he joins eco-terrorist group Avalanche. Avalanche is trying to dismantle the Shinra Electric Power Company, which is using Mako, which in this world is a harvestable magic energy, not dissimilar to fossil fuels in our own world. The game has very strong theming surrounding environmental conservation, acknowledging that energy consumption is killing the planet.
You gonna stand there and pretend you can't hear the plant crying out in pain? I know you can!
That is very much the messaging. The compilation aspect emerged much later in 2004 when Before Crisis Final Fantasy VII was released as a Japan exclusive on mobile phones. Now you might be thinking, mobile game releases, that makes a lot of sense, I've heard of that before. It was 2004, babes. This game, on a flip phone. It takes place about 6 years before the original. I've not played it myself, but I've heard it contains a lot of world building, and it provides some character exposition for the Turks, which is like Midgar's FBI equivalent. Not a ton of plot, and it's essentially unplayable because it's dead media. There is an English fan recreation that you can go find, but I didn't tell you to do it. Now you might be thinking, oh my god, that's so sad that this game wasn't released outside of Japan. There's no English version of it. I was never able to play it, and it has all of this extra content of characters that I love. Fear not, because we did get a flip phone game in 2005. You guessed it. The narratively rich Final Fantasy VII snowboarding hit mobile devices to critical acclaim. Did you know that this game confirms that Zack and Cloud were actually military lovers? The two of them actually have a love triangle with Aerith, and Challengers actually models its plot based on FF7 snowboarding, where the three just lust for each other in all sorts of beautiful ways. And the best part about it is, who's gonna debunk me? If wanting to dispel my misinformation is that important to you, you do that. And I'm happy for you. We're gonna start moving out of release order for a little bit, just for the sake of continuity. FF7, oh my god, just take a sip every time I say FF7. Crisis Core came out in 2007 for the PSP, which honestly was the home to many plot important Square Enix titles that they just didn't want to give a budget for, I guess. Before Crisis takes place, before, but Crisis Core is a prequel in the more traditional sense. It has really heavy plot relevance to the rest of the franchise. I made a video on it. You're welcome to go check that out if you'd like. It follows Zack Fair as he becomes a first-class soldier, as well as Sephiroth's Lucifer arc as he falls from Shinra's finest to perhaps the most venerated video game villain ever written. Objectively, a lot of stuff happens in this game. Subjectively, very little happens in this game. It really serves as like the Cloud Sephiroth origin story. Zack's stuff is important too. I don't find Zack to be a very compelling character though, unfortunately for myself. Spoiler alert for a 17-year-old game, Zack does die at the end in a big heroic sacrifice, and his shadow looms over the entirety of the main game. He does play a different role in the remakes, but the impact of that is yet to be seen. Before Crisis and Crisis Core, a bunch of side content was released. There are a bunch of novels and OVAs, some of which are anime adaptations of said novels. I'm not going to get into those. It's more content for the people who want it, but from my understanding, I've never read it. I've not watched the OVAs. They just don't seem to be required reading to understand everything else that's happening. But if you're a mega fan who loves a deep dive, it's always nice to have a little bit of side content to fall back to. You know what I mean? The film Advent Children, which takes place after the story of Seven, came out in 2005 and then had an extended cut release in 2009. If/when I ever talk about part 1 of the remake trilogy in detail, I will gladly go back and rewatch this film. It's not super relevant, but there are little Easter eggs for those who are paying attention to Advent Children. Dirge of Cerberus is a third-person shooter. It came out in 2006 for the PS2. It follows Vincent Valentine and Yuffie Kisaragi, two party members from Seven, in events that take place after the main game. The main villains are Nero and Weiss, two C-list characters, IMO, that the franchise will bust out whenever they can't use Sephiroth contextually. Nero and Weiss don't appear in Original 7, and they're teased in Crisis Core, which is interesting because in universe, I guess that means they just go away for forever. They do appear in the remakes. Weiss is a secret boss in part 1, and we'll talk a little bit more about Nero in a minute. After the Advent Children extended cut release in 2009, there is a large gap in content where they actually just gave the IP a fucking rest. They came back really strong in 2020, but the last game from what I'm unofficially calling phase 1, that is everything before the remake projects started, is Final Fantasy VII G-Bike. In 2014, they wanted to cash in on mobile games, but for smartphones this time, and this will not be the last time we see Square Enix drop a stupid mobile game for money. I feel like this is a spiritual successor to snowboarding. The G-Bike is literally a motorcycle. I can't imagine any other reason why this exists. I think like one of the really big things keeping FF7 in the cultural zeitgeist in the meantime was Cloud's inclusion in Super Smash Bros. 4. Sephiroth also gets added to Ultimate a little bit later. Still in this era, that's how they maintain relevance, especially for people outside of the fandom. Now we are in phase 2, the remake era. Square Enix is now going to be really begging the question, What is a remake? What is an adaptation? What is AU speculative fiction written by an authority whose content we're supposed to take as canon? I love it when developers essentially make fan fiction of what is their own work, because then isn't all of the fan fiction canon? In chronological order, starting in 2020, we have Final Fantasy VII Remake. It's very frustrating that they called it remake. It makes it harder to talk about, but this is the reboot of the original game. It has the same energy as Nintendo releasing the new Nintendo 3DS, where new is part of that name. So when you're the purchasing customer, it makes it really difficult to differentiate the products, especially if you don't know. Same with Xbox having the Xbox X as its like 4th gen console and then releasing the Series X. They're the same vibe. In this entry, they expand on the Midgar section of the original, which was mostly a linear prologue meant to set up this Shinra versus the environment conflict. In 7 Remake, they've expanded this pretty concise beginning to a 30-hour experience, highlighting way more new and old side characters who lived bottom side in Midgar. Midgar is a 2-tiered city. For my audio listeners, it kind of looks like a rounded dumbbell on its side. The poor people live on the ground below, and they can't get a lot of natural sunlight because they live beneath the plate, where pretty much anyone who isn't lower class lives. Again, we follow Cloud as he meets Barrett Wallace, a major figure in Avalanche and leader of our small troop, Tifa Lockhart, resident haughty bar owner and Cloud's childhood friend, and Aerith Gainsborough, a flower seller, and honestly one of my favorite characters in recent media. We also meet Jesse, Biggs, and Wedge, 3 side characters who have had their roles majorly expanded on. This part also follows Cloud as he's haunted by weird memories of Sephiroth. The team comes together, there's the fall of the Sector 7 plate, they blow up several of the city's Mako reactors. Also of note is the addition of the Whispers, which in my opinion are a literary device meant to enact destiny and ensure that the events in 7 Remake play out the same way that they do in the original. We know for sure now, but at the time, one could glean that this game doesn't take place in the same universe as the original. This is instead a new timeline where very similar things are happening. In this game, the Whispers generally seem to be on the side of Sephiroth, and they are not implemented in the same way in Rebirth, and there are good and bad type of Whispers. For me, their deployment is a little bit inconsistent, but that's okay. In 7 Remake, for me, they were really symbolic of audience expectations, especially for those who were really familiar with the original and who hoped that the story in 7 Remake would be as precise as possible. The Whispers could be interpreted as emblematic of that pressure that the writers might feel. By the end of the game, the party has effectively broken free of the Whispers, which I interpreted as a commitment from the writers that they are not going to succumb to audience pressure and they're going to write the story that they want to write, and that they feel empowered to tell a different story than was told in the original. I do think they're doing something really interesting with the project. I don't think the symbolism of Whispers in part 1 are the same as in part 2. I think they play a really different role. That's what we knew at the time, and fans were going to have to wait until 2024 to know if Square Enix was going to make good on this promise, threat. It really depends on who you ask. So FF7 Remake was released on the PS4. The PS5 would release in November of 2020, and anyone who worked in electronics retail at the time was ready to unalive themselves. And now the Pro is coming out, and I feel like no one cares. It was really all the rage at the time. I think people really needed the PS5 to cope. Parents wanted to give their kids a good Christmas. It was a tough year. I don't know if you knew. Anyways, Square Enix is now in a position where they simply have to re-release the game 14 months after the original came out for a $90 price point. There has been a disparity between price points for PS4 games and PS5 games. It really depends on the publisher, but especially early on, a lot of PS4 games would have a free upgrade on the PS5. A lot of publishers are a little bit scummy. I'm thinking about Persona 3 Reload and the Season Pass release model, because some people paid a lot of money for the deluxe versions and it doesn't come with the season pass. They're expected to pay for that separately. Square Enix didn't do anything like that. I do think Intergrade still cost like $30. I don't think it was cheap, but at least I didn't have to buy the $90 game. This project is called FF7 Remake Intergrade. The purpose of it is introducing the Intergrade chapter, which is a little bit of extra side content. I think it's only like 5 hours. Intergrade is a side story that follows Yuffie. She's a ninja from Wutai. Wutai is another state at odds with Midgar. They've been at war with each other at times in the past. Yuffie is attempting to steal the strongest materia that she can find from Shinra in order to protect her country. They give her an NPC companion named Sonon. He's a new original character. He's literally here to be hot and suffer, honestly, in a very similar way that a lot of stories would employ women characters, because the main villain is Nero, who I also talked about. They didn't have anything to do with him, but any character that exists is a card that they can play to make new stories. So Nero's the bad guy because they infiltrate Shinra and he's like in the basement. I don't know. Sonon is literally just like gorgeous, nice man who is earnestly attempting to help Yuffie. He doesn't really have a motivation. I think he has a dead little sister trauma. I think that informs a bit. He's a nice guy and he shouldn't have been killed like that because he dies at the end. And now Yuffie has trauma. And a lot of stories do this the opposite way. Oh, my wife died. Oh, my girlfriend died. Sonon wasn't Yuffie's boyfriend. I think that's problematic age gap content, and I'm sure some of you live for that. It isn't actually left crystal clear if Sonon dies at the end. I'm sure that we'll see some sort of resolution in part 3 because he and Nero appear only through Yuffie's flashbacks in part 2. Maybe we'll see him again. We have yet to find out. The other main thing that this DLC confirms, because they add a little epilogue following our main party, is that in some capacity, Zack will be returning to play an expanded role in Rebirth beyond just being a dead guy whose impact lingers. In the meantime, they release another novel expanding on Tifa and Aerith. It's basically FF7 Fortnite, and then FF7 The First Soldier comes out. We're still in 2021. It's a free-to-play battle royale that was so critically panned that it shut down in a year and a half. Square Enix would make another attempt at a free-to-play money-sucking mobile title in 2023 with FF7 Ever Crisis, because the crisis is forever, which they presented as a more faithful remake of the entire compilation. So it would include content from Dirge of Cerberus, which has largely been buried. We haven't really seen it since its original release, and it would generally follow the history of FF7. The game has been much more positively received compared to First Soldier, which makes sense. The bar First Soldier set was honestly on the ground. This sort of lo-fi remake is something that we're more familiar with, and it's way more in line with the series because it's an RPG and aesthetically is very similar to the original game. They also include a Sephiroth backstory from when he was training to be a soldier, like he's a teenager probably at this time. This game has big impacts on Rebirth in ways that I don't understand. I did download it for PC, so I might get into it just to like comprehend Glenn. He seems to play a big role, but I don't know who this man is. I thought he was a new original character, and then you go on the internet and people are like, oh my god, deep cut character from Ever Crisis. I've been like a longtime Kingdom Hearts fan. I've played almost every Kingdom Hearts game, including Union Cross, although I didn't play Union Cross to the end, but it has the same energy of Union Cross being this huge mobile game that goes on for forever and is like tangentially related to what's actually happening in the main plot, but is so canonically important. I don't think they've done it to the extent of Union Cross quite yet, but there's always time. The last game I want to talk about is, of course, another remake, but this time it's a very normal one. In 2022, they released Crisis Core Final Fantasy VII Reunion, which is just an enhancement of the PSP game. It's been upgraded mechanically and visually for modern home consoles. There's no trick, there's no Easter egg. I don't think there's enough good Zack Fair content from the original Crisis Core to support a 15 to 20 hour experience. I actually think this game could have been served very well with a remake trilogy treatment where they really enhance it and fill in a lot of the blanks in between, because one of my big issues with the story is pacing. We see a lot of stuff happen that has nothing to do with our main characters. Crisis Core follows a lot of our side cast, and they also expand a little bit more on Aerith, who is honestly quite secretive. She's not always leading with facts and information. It just would have been nice to expand on those characters a little bit more. One thing I think Rebirth did really successfully was make me believe that Zack and Aerith actually were a couple and wanted to be together, which Crisis Core does not achieve. I talked a lot of shit about Crisis Core, but I do have to admit that having played it did enrich my experience playing Rebirth, just because I have that prequel context and I was able to see it with my own eyes. So at this point, we have Crisis Core Reunion, a true remake that is simply an enhancement of the original. Ever Crisis is a wild mobile game. I do think a lot of people really would have liked Ever Crisis to be just like a single iteration. Perhaps it would be more positively received if it was just sort of an abridged version of all of the content in the franchise, kind of condensed together. I think it could have really reinvigorated a lot of older fans too, because there are a lot of people who don't like the remake trilogy. And I think it's valid because they're taking big big swings. They're not just breathing new life into an old story. Like, they're really doing something different. So I can understand that a lot of like diehard people aren't getting what they want. I think Ever Crisis would have been a nice little band-aid to honor people who have been with the franchise for a long time. I don't think it does that. So we have a true remake, we have like a disjointed semi-remake in Ever Crisis, and then we have VII Remake and Rebirth, which are adaptations of the original. It just feels like they're trying to do a lot, especially because Remake and Rebirth, they're both huge games. The undertaking of making them is massive. I really enjoyed Remake. It's one of my favorites. Remake is the title that really got me into the Final Fantasy franchise. I have a lot of the games, but I've really struggled to connect with them. And because Remake really cleanly falls into like that prestige AAA cinematic movie game, like for me, it's very similar to God of War, Ragnarok. It's very similar to Control. It's visually stunning. It's quite linear. There's not a lot of exploration, and it's like obviously high budget. I love VII Remake. I do agree that it has some problems, but I think it's really good at what it does. Rebirth, I like. Mentally though, Rebirth, I like it more thinking about it and remembering the good parts. I didn't like playing it. For me, I think Rebirth is going to be one of those works that I enjoy talking about separate from actually experiencing it than I did playing it. You know what I mean? It makes sense that it was open world because the original game was open world. I just don't know if they made an interesting open world, but that's its own video. After considering all of this, what I'm left thinking about is, what's the plan? Especially in these big three projects, they're all doing really different things, and we're not being presented as the consumer with a really unified vision of the franchise going forward. And obviously something like Ever Crisis is going to feel money motivated, and that Square Enix and the developers are relying on cashing in on fans' goodwill and positive perception of the franchise. But my question is like, are they going to remake any more of the games? What happens when the trilogy project is over? I know we're probably not going to get that third game for another 4 or 5 years, depending on what they plan on doing with it. They've built a lot of the open world, so they probably finished a lot of that work in Rebirth already, but is the intention to have everything playable on one system? Because even then that's not possible. Ever Crisis is for mobile and PC only, and that game was presented as a more faithful remake, but they really just do the highlights of each plotline, and right now they only cover FF7, Crisis Core, and the original First Soldier content. So it's stuff that we already conveniently have access to. Like, where's the before Crisis content? Where's Dirge of Cerberus? So yeah, I guess the question I'm left off with is like, how many things are they going to release in the meantime in order to sustain our interest? I'm just interested to know what they're going to do next, because I don't think Crisis Core was very successful. Ever Crisis is like painfully average. There are some ways to do a live service rollout that have worked, but I just don't think this was the one. Are we going to get snowboarding in part 3 of the trilogy? What do you guys think part 3 of the trilogy is going to be called? What if it's Redux? Right now, we're just being presented with 3 products that, at least in the past 4, almost 5 years, aim to achieve really different things. They don't work in tandem with each other, nor are they meant to work in tandem with each other. Anyways, that is the compilation of Final Fantasy VII up until now. I think I hit every title besides the books and the OVAs. Are the books and the OVAs banging? I hate reading, but you know, if they're really good, I'm totally open to them, especially because there's ones about Tifa and Aerith, and I love consuming content about kind of overlooked women characters in media. So that would be something really interesting to me. Have you seen the OVAs? Which Final Fantasy VII game is your favorite? Are you an OG fan? Are you like me and the remake really put you on, and now you want to go and play the original? You want to go and play the Before Crisis rebuild, download it on your computer, ready to go whenever you're ready to play it? I have no time to play video games, but let me know down below. Thank you so much for watching. I appreciate you guys being here. I have a Discord if you'd like to join. We mostly just chat about current video game news because we're all just kind of waiting on Switch 2 right now. Hey, I have a Patreon if you'd like to support me on Patreon. I have a Coffee if you'd like to support me on Coffee. You can become a channel member. Those are just avenues if you'd like to just tip me a little bit more. But nonetheless, I appreciate you being here. Let me know what you think. Like, subscribe, comment, and I will see you in the next one.